my girlfriend quietly said. I deserve someone everyone notices the moment he walks inside. I smiled and let her leave. 9 months later, she watched complete strangers wait patiently just to speak with me after a community fundraiser ended. I deserve someone everyone notices the moment he walks inside. She said it casually, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror that morning. I didn't answer. Instead, I set my coffee cup down on the counter, slow and quiet, the way you set down something you don't want to break. I looked at the apartment key still hanging on the hook by the door, the one I'd had made for her 2 years ago. That's when something finally clicked. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply made one decision. At that moment, I thought I was only ending a relationship. Months later, I'd realize I had changed both of our lives forever. I thought we were building a future. I trusted her completely. I believed this relationship was permanent. I had absolutely no idea it had already started falling apart. Looking back, that wasn't even the beginning. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 32. We lived in Brooklyn. She worked in marketing. I owned a small consulting business. We'd been together for almost 5 years. That morning had started like any other Sunday. Rhonda had her laptop open at the kitchen table, scrolling through something on her phone, half paying attention to me. I'd asked if she wanted to come to a work dinner that Friday. Nothing fancy, just a client appreciation thing at a mid-sized restaurant in Park Slope. She didn't even look up. Is Clifford going to be there? Probably. What? No reason. A pause. Then, without any real weight to it, like she was commenting on the weather, I deserve someone everyone notices the moment he walks inside. I stood there for a second, holding my coffee, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking. She didn't. I didn't say anything back. I grabbed my jacket, said I had errands to run, and left. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Just a bad morning. Looking back, I should have noticed it wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, just the first time she'd said it to my face. The dry cleaner on 5th Avenue had my 2 suits ready, the ones I wore to client meetings. I picked them up, paid, and sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time without starting the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from Rodney, my business partner. Client wants to push the Tuesday call to Thursday. Cool. I texted back a thumbs up and kept sitting there. 5 years. A shared streaming account. Her toothbrush next to mine. A lease with both our names on it, renewing again in August. None of that had felt fragile until 20 minutes ago. I drove home. She was gone. A note on the counter said she was at her sister's for the afternoon. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I just sat on the couch and stared at the muted TV for an hour, turning her sentence over and over in my head. Someone everyone notices the moment he walks inside. I wasn't that. I knew I wasn't that. I ran a consulting firm with 4 employees out of a shared office space in Dumbo. I wore the same navy suit to every meeting because it fit well, and I didn't think about clothes much. I wasn't loud. I wasn't the guy who lit up a room. I'd never thought that was a problem before. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later. Friday night, the client dinner. Rhonda came, because backing out would have looked strange to her friends who also knew Rodney's wife, Paula. She sat next to me, smiled at the right moments, laughed at Clifford's jokes a little too easily. Clifford ran a much bigger firm than mine. Commercial real estate, corner office in Midtown, the kind of guy who walked into a restaurant and the hostess remembered his name. He wasn't a bad guy. That was almost worse. I couldn't even resent him properly. Halfway through dinner, I went to the restroom. When I came back, Rhonda and Clifford were leaning close together, laughing about something. She caught my eye over his shoulder for exactly 1 second before turning back to him. I sat down. Nobody noticed I'd gone quiet. At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid. Looking back, I wasn't. 3 weeks after that dinner, Rhonda started staying at her sister's more. Then it became her own place. A sublet in Bushwick, she said, was closer to work. I helped her carry 2 boxes down to a friend's car and didn't ask why she needed so many boxes for a temporary sublet. We never officially said the word breakup. It just happened in pieces: a returned key, a canceled joint grocery delivery, a Venmo request for her half of a security deposit refund. The apartment felt enormous with just me in it. I kept finding her things for months. A hair tie on the bathroom counter. A phone charging cable I didn't recognize as mine until I traced the cord to nothing. I didn't throw them away right away. I just moved them into a drawer, like putting off a decision I'd already made. I had no idea what was coming next. Not the good part, and not the hard part either. The hard part came first, the way it usually does. Rodney called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight in a way I hadn't heard before. We lost the Hendricks account. Hendricks was 40% of our revenue. I sat down hard in my desk chair. What happened? They said budget cuts. But I think it's more than that. I think Clifford's firm poached them. I didn't say anything for a long moment. It didn't feel like a coincidence, even though I couldn't prove it wasn't. Over the next 2 months, 2 more clients left. Small ones, but it stacked up. I stopped taking a salary so I could keep paying my 2 junior employees. I moved out of the Dumbo office and worked out of a coffee shop near my new 1-bedroom in Sunset Park, the kind of apartment with a radiator that clanked all night. I remember standing in line at that coffee shop, checking my bank balance on my phone, watching a barista call out someone else's order, and thinking, this is not what 32 was supposed to look like. Looking back, I should have seen that moment as the bottom. It wasn't. The bottom came at a family barbecue. My cousin Dwight was hosting a 4th of July thing in his backyard in Queens, the kind with a cheap folding table and too many hot dogs. I hadn't wanted to go, but my mother insisted. Rhonda was there. Nobody had told me she'd be there. She came with Clifford. I stood by the cooler holding a warm can of soda, watching her laugh at something he said, her hand resting easily on his forearm the way it used to rest on mine. Nobody in my family said anything. They just watched me, waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't react. I said hello to Clifford like he was any other guest, got a plate of food, and sat with my mother for 20 minutes before I left early, claiming a work call that didn't exist. In the car, I let myself feel it. Not anger. Something quieter and worse. The sense that I had become the footnote in my own relationship, the before picture in someone else's story. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my business's shrinking numbers, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with Rhonda at all. I was going to rebuild, not to prove anything to her, just because the alternative was watching myself disappear. The first thing I did was unglamorous. I called every client who'd left and asked, directly, why. Most didn't answer. One did, a small manufacturing company in Red Hook, run by a woman named Carla. Honestly, she said, your proposals were good, but you seemed distracted the last few months. Like your head wasn't in it. It stung. Mostly because it was true. I spent the next 6 weeks doing something I hadn't done in years, working like I actually wanted the business to survive, instead of coasting on relationships I'd built when things were easier. I redid our pitch deck. I cut our prices for 3 new clients just to get momentum back. I started showing up to networking breakfasts I used to skip. Small success. Carla came back and brought a referral with her. Unexpected setback. One of my 2 employees quit, taking a stable job at a bigger firm. I couldn't blame her. New opportunity. Rodney found us a shot at a mid-sized logistics client through an old college friend. Emotional setback. We lost the pitch. I drove home that night and sat in my car outside my building for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Better decision. Instead of sulking, I called the logistics company's CFO the next morning and asked, plainly, what we could have done differently. He gave me a real answer. I used it. Visible improvement. 3 months later, that same CFO called us back for a smaller project, a trial run. Another challenge. Cash flow got tight enough that I sold my car and started taking the subway everywhere, telling myself it was temporary. It was, but I didn't know that yet. Somewhere in that stretch, I stopped waiting for Rhonda to text me. I stopped checking if she'd viewed my Instagram story. I wasn't healed, exactly. I just didn't have the bandwidth for it anymore. Between the trial project, 2 new small clients, and covering shifts my remaining employee couldn't, there wasn't room left in my head for anything else. That's when I remembered something from 3 years earlier, back when Rhonda and I first moved in together. We'd gone to a friend's wedding, and during the reception she'd pulled me aside and said, half joking, you work too hard for things nobody notices. At the time I'd laughed it off. I thought she meant it as a compliment about my work ethic. Looking back, she'd actually warned me. I simply hadn't understood what she meant, that she needed to be noticed, and my kind of steady, unglamorous effort wasn't the kind that got noticed in a room. I didn't resent her for it anymore. I just finally understood the shape of what had happened. The trial project with the logistics company turned into a full contract by winter. It wasn't huge, but it was stable, and stable was worth more to me than huge at that point. I hired back a part-time employee. I moved my office out of the coffee shop and into a small shared suite in Industry City. Rodney and I started getting asked to speak on a local small business panel. Nothing major, a Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce event. but it was the first time anyone had asked me to speak about anything. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The night before, I stood in front of my closet, still holding onto that same navy suit, and for the first time in over a year, I thought about buying a new one. Not to impress anyone, just because I realized I hadn't updated a single thing about myself in longer than I wanted to admit. I bought the suit. It fit better than I expected. The panel went fine, not dramatic, not a movie moment. I talked about small business resilience, answered a few questions, and a woman from a local nonprofit came up to me afterward and asked if I'd be interested in volunteering some consulting hours for a community fundraiser her organization was planning in the spring. I said yes to that too. Over the next 4 months, I helped that nonprofit, mostly financial planning, some marketing structure, nothing glamorous, while also keeping my own business running. It was exhausting in a way that felt different from the exhaustion of the year before. This kind felt like it was building towards something instead of just holding a line. Somewhere in there, without really noticing when it happened, I stopped thinking about Rhonda every day. Not because I'd forced myself to, because there was finally enough else in my life to think about. The fundraiser was held at a renovated warehouse space near the Gowanus Canal, the kind of place with exposed brick and string lights that made everything look better than it probably was. 200 people, a silent auction, a short program. I wasn't the main speaker. I was there to help run logistics and, at the organizer's request, say a few words about the financial side of the program we'd built. I kept it short. Numbers, impact, thank yous. Nothing showy. Afterward, I expected to slip out and help break down tables. Instead, people kept stopping me. A city councilwoman's aide asked for my card. Carla, who'd come as a guest, introduced me to 2 other small business owners. A local reporter covering the event asked if she could quote me for a piece on community-funded small business support. I stood near the drink table, a little overwhelmed, watching a small line of people wait to talk to me. Not because I was loud, not because I'd walked in and lit up the room, but because for months I'd been doing quiet, consistent work that had finally started to speak for itself. That's when I saw her. Rhonda was standing near the back with Clifford, half in shadow near the exit. I don't know how long she'd been there. Long enough, apparently, to watch the last 20 minutes. She didn't approach right away. She watched a woman shake my hand and thank me for the guidance our program had given her daughter's after-school initiative. She watched Rodney clap me on the shoulder and say something that made me laugh. I didn't perform for her. I wasn't even thinking about her. That was the strange part. I'd spent a year almost afraid of a moment like this, imagining what I'd say if I ever ran into her somewhere I looked successful. Now that it was happening, I didn't feel the need to say anything at all. Eventually, the small crowd around me thinned out. She walked over alone. Clifford stayed by the door. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She looked at me for a second too long, like she was recalibrating something. "This is a great event. I didn't know you did this kind of work now. Started about 8 months ago. You look." She paused, like she was choosing the word carefully. "Different." "I've been busy." There was a silence that used to feel comfortable between us, and now just felt like distance. She glanced toward the door, toward Clifford, then back at me. "Can we get coffee sometime? Just to talk?" I thought about it. "Not for long. I don't think that's a good idea." She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, but had needed to ask anyway. "Okay." She didn't argue. She lowered her eyes for a moment, and something in her expression looked like it understood exactly what she'd lost, even if she couldn't have explained it a year earlier. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." She walked back toward the door. I watched her go, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just a quiet, settled feeling, like closing a book I'd finally finished. I never replied to the text she sent 2 days later. Some conversations end forever, and that's all right. I turned back to the room, to Rodney waving me over toward a group near the auction table, and I walked toward the people who were actually still part of my life. That was the last time I ever saw her.